Every participant that comes on the Inside session, we get them to share, I guess, a more philosophical moment with us. So you need to complete this sentence. Life is ...
Life is a journey of discovery, Scotty. I think you're always discovering new things about life and about yourself. I think some of the greatest discoveries are probably, for me, it was the birth of my kids. I think there's no other time in your life that you can sort of just, I don't know, you feel something that's indescribable, and I think you realise how precious life actually is. You kind of look down at the young one and you just think, how is this possible? How has this happened? And then I think, when you go through that moment, you realise that's what life is, and that's how precious it is. And I think the other biggest discovery is when you discover yourself, ultimately, what makes you tick and what makes you happy, and what you want ultimately out of life. That's a pretty big discovery, but you're always going through. I think also the day you discover the ability to cope, because life throws you a lot of challenges, and you've just got to, you just got to find a mechanism to cope through, whatever that is.
No one tells you what you're supposed to do, where we're going or what you do is up to me.
Brendan Rinaldi's leadership is a combination of sporting experience, a focus on engagement and wellbeing, and 8 years of working in crisis management. To discuss all things leadership, welcome, Brendan. How are you?
Hey, Scotty. Good to see you.
Great to have you on LifeChanger's Inside Sessions. Lots to talk about. We go a long way back. Let's get right to the start of your early leadership journey, and I guess what you took from sport that you were able to take straight into your leadership pathway early, if anything.
Yeah. Oh, firstly, good to be on the session with you, Scotty, and thanks for having me. But I guess I was sort of thrown into leadership fairly early on. I sort of went from no direct reports in a role at the bank to all of a sudden building a new team, 13 direct reports. And I remember having breakfast with my boss at the time, who was asking if I wanted to do the role, and I said, I haven't been here long. I'm not leading a team. Am I the right fit for the role? And he said, yep, you'll learn, basically. He said, I'll support you, but you'll learn. So very privileged to have a leader like that, to have so much faith in me, just to throw me into a role like that, and hadn't really had a lot of corporate leadership training, if you like. So I did have to learn on a lot of the experience through basically a whole life of playing football at different levels and a lot of different coaches. I was very fortunate to have some great coaches and even mentors during my time through my teens and early 20s playing football, and also played for some great teams, like obviously with you, Scotty, at Subiaco. And I think for me, just some of the key learnings when I thought back to some of the best teams I was involved with, it was coaches that got to know their players. So as a leader, getting to know your staff, what makes them tick, what makes them perform. And I think once you do that, you get a better understanding of how to get the best out of people. But also when I think back to great teams, it was really the connection, like for us in a footy team, the players like that, through that successful era at Subiaco, the players genuinely wanted to be around each other, played for each other. And, some of the best teams that I've been involved in from a work perspective are those teams when you turn up to work because you want to see that person you work with, and not because it's a job, not because you're getting paid, but you genuinely turn up to work because your mate's there and you want to perform well together. So I think working hard but genuinely connecting with your peers. I mean, in reality, you spend most of your waking hours outside of COVID, so go back to normal times, but you would spend more time with your colleagues at work than you would your family and friends. So you've got to like the people you work with. If you don't, it's not going to be very pleasant life if you can't get along with the people that sitting beside you most of the time. So that's some of the key things I took in early on.
There's a lot of different conversations and thoughts around the crossover of sport to business and business to sport. In your experience, do you find a lot of those sporting experiences have been transferable? And have there been moments where you've feel yourself channeling a coach or channeling an experience from sport and taking it into the workplace?
Oh, definitely, mate. Yeah, I mean, if you ask anyone in my team, they'd probably get sick of my footy analogies or something like that. Fortunately, being in Adelaide, it's predominantly a footy state, so everyone kind of gets it. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of crossover, and I think particularly playing a team sport and being part of a team, there's a lot that translates into leadership. One of the key things for us and that I say to my team is let's not focus on the results. We do the 1%ers and we do our job properly. The results take care of themselves. And it's similar to what a footy coach has always said in terms of, don't keep looking at the scoreboard. That's not going to solve anything. Just keep playing your role in the team, doing those 1%ers and sticking to the game plan, if you like. And the scoreboard takes care of itself. I think, the key difference is sport, and particularly football, you've got a result every week that's something tangible. So that's a little bit different to the corporate world. So you've got to come up with something that sort of keeps your finger on the pulse a little bit more. I mean, if you go to AFL level, which obviously you've experienced, Scotty, you're kind of in the public or in the scrutiny week on week. The similarity to that is that, we're working for a bank, we're in the public eye quite regularly as well. So there's some similarities and crossover there. I think, some sporting organisations are a little bit more nimble. They probably change a bit quicker, but also adapt quicker because you've got young kids coming through the system all the time. And we know that the attention span has changed over time and how clubs have adapted to that and how to approach the youth. Like if you look at coaches 10, 20 years ago, they're completely different to what they are now. They're not the guys that get out there and scream and yell. They're guys that get a lot more personable with their players, still hold them accountable, obviously, but just have a different approach. So lots of similarities, lots of differences. I think both can learn from each other, probably more so than what they do. I think that's probably the key opportunity.
What about I think one of the interesting sort of comparisons is that, I guess it's the feedback loop. So performance and feedback, in a sporting sense, that's really a 7-day journey from here's our performance. There's immediate feedback from coaches, media, etc., and then there needs to be an adjustment, and then realign and go again. I think that actually drives very transparent, quick, honest, sometimes brutal feedback in a sporting sense. Do you think there's some learnings that in a corporate environment we could actually examine that feedback loop and maybe take more of that honest appraisal into a corporate environment?
Yeah, totally, Scotty. I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's probably easier in a way with sport because you've got that, those are results coming through every week and you do have that feedback. But that's something, certainly feedback is an area that I know as our organisation, we've worked a lot on how to give that open, transparent feedback. I guess if you're doing it week on week, you get used to it, you get a bit of feedback. Some of our leaders probably might do it twice a year, deliberately in terms of half-year performance, full-year performance to get that chance. But I think certainly learning from coaches, like yourself or like other sporting coaches that do give that feedback regularly, there's a fair bit to learn there from a corporate organisation as well, I reckon, just on timely feedback, whether that's good or bad, but actually not avoiding those tough conversations as well, because that's how people develop. I've probably been times when I've sat in feedback conversations and just got a pat on the back, and that's always nice for our ego, but you don't actually learn anything unless you get some positive constructive feedback. So I think even as the receiver, there's a bit to learn from people too, just to make sure that they're open-minded and seeking that constructive feedback from their leaders as well. I was talking to Rob Chapman yesterday, who's obviously chairman of the Crows. He was talking about one of the coaches that was at the club in his time and just said that they had a coach come in and he was brilliant and doing everything right. And the first meeting they had, this coach drilled him on feedback, and he said, "Oh, you're doing everything right." He said, "No, well, tell me how I can improve. I'm surely I can get better." he said next time they caught up, he stayed up all night trying to think of, of what he could say. But it's obviously important and healthy for a relationship, and how an organisation can move forward. You don't get anywhere by just, like I said, giving people a pat on the back and focusing on the positives all the time.
No, and I think that's a common denominator of any high-performance environment, whether it's sporting or corporate. There is that incessant want for really honest and open feedback that helps you improve. Where in organisations I've seen that aren't performing at their optimum, they want honest conversations until you actually have them. So it's being able to accept that feedback as well. So clearly the sporting experience has been a great bedrock and foundation for part of your leadership style. The other piece that I really want to tap into is 8 years in crisis management. So PwC, Mentha, and your early time at ANZ. That time spent around crisis management, how has that shaped you as a leader, and how some of those lessons that you would have taken out of those 8 years apply to the time that we're in right now?
Yeah. I think it's been highly valuable, Scotty. Like going in, I worked through the GFC in crisis management. Some of those working for receivers or administrators with Mentha and PwC, you just, at quite a young age, you go into a business and you replace management. All of a sudden, you might get thrown into a CFO role in an industry you've never worked in before, and you're forced to learn pretty quickly. And you do that a couple of times, you start to learn that you become business agnostic because you learn what the key drivers of business are. But I think the key thing you learn is it's all about the people as well, how you read people, how you deal with people, and how you lead people as well. So, and ultimately, sometimes in crisis management, when you're dealing with people, particularly whether it be financial distress or some form of stress, they're not always thinking straight. There's always a tendency to want to blame something or someone else for someone's failure. So, particularly when I got sort of further advanced into the crisis management, sort of learning, even though I had a lot of study under my belt, and I'm a qualified accountant and things like that, so good on the numbers, but sort of learnt that a lot of that side of things was more about psychology than numbers. So I actually started picking up a lot of books on psychology and just learning about the human brain and how people think and how they react in times of stress and things like that. And I think that's helped my leadership immensely as well. And I know the great work you're doing with LifeChanger and helping kids become more resilient teens and focusing on their well-being. I just wish that everyone did have a bit better education on how their mind works and how to get fitter in the mind. If we're training for a game or something that's physical, we always get our body fit. But how do you get your mind fit? And also, as an athlete, you can learn about your body, and when you're pushing yourself a bit too hard. I don't think we're very good as society about knowing that with our own sort of mindset as well. So I think working through crisis management, studying that psychology, building really resilient teams. And I think from a team perspective, it also shows that when you've got a team dealing with, I remember coming into work early days when I was started at ANZ, and there'd be something, you couldn't go in and plan your day because something would just come up that had to be actioned or addressed. So, and for a period there, it was genuinely every day you'd rock into work and some issue would come up and you just had to action it. You had to just get onto it. So it was very high intense environment, but we had such a strong culture. We had such a group of great people. And it was because we were such a close group. Everyone connected really well. Not only we worked hard together, but we did the BRW triathlon together. We went to the ball together, and people used to look inwards to our group and think we were cliquey, and it wasn't that. Like we always invited others in. We were just really close, and I think you need that because when you're dealing with these environments of high stress, you need an outlet, and a lot of times that outlet is the person you're working for. And when they become close and they become friends, if you like, you can get that outlet. And I remember clearly one day when I knew that the team had responded well was I had some team members come up and talk to me about a certain individual and say, "Oh, this person's really struggling. I think you need to do something." I said, "Well, why are you bringing this to me?" And they said, "Well, you're the leader. You should go and say something to him." I said, "Well, what have you done about it? Have you taken him for a coffee, or have you taken him for a drink after work?" And these sort of few people sat back and went, "Oh, no." I said, "Well, why not? He's your colleague." I said, "I'm sure he'd get a lot out of it." And I had to go off and travel for couple of weeks with work, and I came back and every single one of person in the team had gone and had a coffee or a drink with this person, and he was fine after that. He just needed a bit of needed to sort of get a few things off his chest and socialise it with the team, and he was good. And I think that was you sort of learn that as well, that the more that you connect, the more that you perform, and you can actually create those resilient teams because they can bounce stuff off each other. So it was highly valuable for my career, Scotty.
So right now, let's take some of those learnings and apply it to right now. There's not everyone is in crisis. There are some businesses that are absolutely thriving at the moment. I was reading yesterday, Mitre 10 are having record results right at the minute. But if you look at the media cycle, over a 24-hour period, we seem to lurch from one alarming crisis to the other. Some are real, some aren't. What advice would you give not only to emerging business leaders, but just to people in general who tune into the podcast? How do you deal with crisis? What's some simple things people can think about?
I think the key thing, and I guess we all in that first initial lockdown, so I think like March, early April, it was the whole country. It wasn't just Victoria, and everyone shut down. So I think the key thing is just control what you can control. Don't get sort of anxious about the unknown, or try to park that anxiety, because your mind can just go off on a tangent on thinking about 1,000,001 things, and most of them you can't control. So you just got to think to yourself, what's in my environment that I can control? And I guess for me as a leader, that was how my people responded. So you could control, email traffic. So we try not to put too much information out to our staff. We try to keep it really consistent. And I think from an organisation perspective, so my leaders, starting at the top with Shane, did it extremely well. We tried to just make sure there was sort of very few but consistent sources of information coming out. It wasn't coming from everyone, because we've obviously got quite an interesting hierarchy. And if you're not careful, you've got 5 leaders shooting similar but different messages to your whole team. So consistency was key, but also just controlling what you can control, and try not to let the other stuff, get to you, because it can if you let it. And I guess for business owners, we see a lot of business owners that are great at what they do. They might be great in customer service. They might be great engineers, not necessarily great on the financial side of things. So if all of a sudden your business is shut, you might not be able to produce more product. You might not be able to serve your customers because your cafe is shut. What you can control is the financial elements. So get across your numbers, get across your cash flow. How do you present those numbers? Because, when JobKeeper came out, you had to present your data to the ATO to qualify. You've got to go back to your bank. So you can get on top of your financial reporting. So little things like that, and that's where the improvements are. I think for a business that faces financial difficulty, it's all about finding, just stabilise the business. So just know what cost you can strip out, know your numbers inside out. Don't look too far advanced. Don't think 12 months ahead, this is what my business is going to look like. Think 3 months ahead and try and do a pretty basic cash flow over sort of 13-week period to know exactly what your ins and outs are. And that's going to be important for Victoria as they scale up. If you've got a pub that's been shut for a long time and you've probably depleted your inventory. So when you think about a big pub starting back up again, you're going to have to buy all your stock, all your food, staff back up, all that sort of thing. So you don't want to think too far. You just want to think, what's this next period look like, and how can I control that? And just making sure you're across all the ins and outs. And does this decision make sense, or does that decision make sense? And sensitize it a bit in your own mind. Like, if I went down this path and this happened, because it's very hard in this environment to forecast given lots of variability, right? But you've got to do it on what you know today. So if we know that you're only allowed 80 patrons, and you got to work off that. But you know that all things being equal, it's probably going to double 2 weeks later, sort of thing. So you can sort of base it on the knowledge of what you know today. That's what you can control, but then sensitize it so you know. So I guess the key message there, Scotty, is just control what you can.
I think there's some great practical advice, particularly for business owners as they're, in the environment that they're in right now, but emerging out of COVID as well. Yeah. I think there's some really good tips in that. Interestingly, I was reading an article and it was in reference to Napoleon Bonaparte. And I'm not going to say it was his EA, but it was his equivalent of whatever was his EA at that point in time in history. And he had a really simple instruction to that person, and regarding any mail or correspondence that would come his way, was read through all of it. If it's an absolute no-brainer, a crisis that needs to be dealt with right now, he said, I want to see it immediately. But outside of that, if you can't qualify it as an absolute crisis right now, I don't want to see it for 3 weeks. And his theory on that was, by that time, in 3 weeks, most of the things that were almost a crisis had actually evaporated because they never were. And I thought that's a great way for us to look at the current media cycle. Otherwise, we'll lurch from one crisis to another. And many of them aren't actually that. They're just getting shaped that way by the media. When Trevor Hendy and I spent some time with you as you were, I guess, early days in your leadership role at ANZ, working with your team, it was really clear that one of the points of difference for you was going to be a focus around wellbeing and engagement. And you had a firm belief that that was going to be a contributor to peak performance. Has it unfolded that way? Has it worked?
Yes, in a nutshell, Scotty. I mean, it's one of those things that it continues to evolve. It's like culture. You don't all of a sudden wake up one day and you've got a good culture. It's something that continually evolves and you continually have to work on. So yeah, I was obviously very fortunate. I remember you and I catching up as I was making the move to Adelaide, and you kindly offered to come across and spend a bit of time with the team, with Trev, and I'm very grateful for that. I've always enjoyed your perspective on leading teams and across the sporting and corporate world as well. So, that I've been very fortunate there and value our relationship. And I think it was very evident. I'd come into a team that had the same leader for 10 years, very good business, very stable business, quite a capable team, but just seemed to be lacking a bit of engagement. And probably it was a business that was more focused on the outcome and the numbers rather than what was driving those numbers, which ultimately is your people. You see Richard Branson a lot saying it's always about the staff, not about the customer, because if you've got happy staff, the customer piece will follow as well. And I tend to agree. Like, a lot of people say it's all about the customer, but again, I always challenge that to say, well, if you haven't got happy people, what hope have your customers got? So you've got to balance the two, but I think it does start with staff. And so we went down a pretty clear path. I mean, you could almost say we put all our chips on black, and that was wellbeing. And we went pretty hard. And people you hear that to come up a lot, wellbeing, during this COVID era at the moment. And people say, it only came in, and I'll say, some people say 5 or 10 years ago, but it was actually less than that. I still remember, and you'll remember this because I think I called you afterwards to talk to you about it. I was at a leadership conference only a few months after I started. And one of the things was, if we could change sort of one thing in the business, what would we focus on? And I remember being in a little workshop group, and I said, I think wellbeing of our staff. We've got such a diverse range of people, a lot of them been in their jobs for a while, but we just need to drive engagement. We need to show them that we care about them, build their capability and their skill set so they can be the best that they can be at work, but also be the best people they can be. And sort of got some funny looks at that time, Scotty, because I think wellbeing was still one of these, subjects that wasn't for everyone. But funnily enough, the next day we were all split up into 12 groups and all had to say the one topic we wanted to focus on. And 9 out of the 12 groups said wellbeing of our people, engagement of staff. So that was pretty telling, and that was a good message from the group, that they believed in it and they saw that was key as well. So, obviously had yourself and Trev over, had some other people come in, and we sort of just, I think as a first point, like I said, you've always got to work on it. It was always on the agenda at all of our leadership meetings, wellbeing. For any of our leadership days, it was on the agenda. For any of our team days, it was on the agenda. We always had an element. Typically in the past, these team days were all business focused. So they were always about product, about, risk or some of our models or something like that. But we added quite a big element around culture and wellbeing and performance. And it really started to resonate with our people. And I think even after that, that time when you and Trev came over to talk to our leadership group here in SA, someone came up to me and said, "Oh, it's really nice to have a leader in the business that actually cares for their people." And I sort of didn't know how to take that at first. I thought, surely all leaders care about their people. But at least the team was getting that message, which was really, really good for me. And I think, without going into it too much, our engagement lifted enormously. Our results, double-digit growth across an industry that's quite, stagnant, or has been. It's been competitive for a while, and margins have been under pressure. So, we've had some really strong growth. And I guess the other part that's really pleasing is we've driven, the community aspect really strong as well. So we've been out there in the community. I think, our business on a per capita basis did more volunteering hours, raised more money for charity. So, that sort of whole ecosystem just tended to sort of fall into place, and just giving that message to people around looking after themselves. And we're probably one of the more radical things we did, which is not for every business. It sort of works for our business because we're not just 9 to 5. You can be quite flexible, and we've always promoted flexible working to a degree, but this was just, saying to people, I want you to dedicate 4 hours of your work week towards your own health and wellbeing, whatever that means to you. So, we had people going for lunchtime runs together, and I think we even had school holidays one day, and one of the girls from the office took everyone's kids to the movies for a couple of hours because, people have all got their kids at home and didn't know how to handle it. But other people took up coaching at their local footy club for their kids and stuff that they hadn't done before. One of the amazing things was we had about 6 people in the business that quit smoking too. So that's a real tangible outcome. But, overall, the message started to get through. And we've done some challenges and things along the way, but some things have worked, some things haven't. We've had different people come in. Some have resonated, some haven't. So it's a bit of trial and error. Some things catch on and get engagement, others don't. But I think you just keep giving that consistent message, and you try and live. I think when you promote wellbeing, you naturally take better care of yourself too at times. So it's a win-win for everyone.
I think you made a point about leaders sort of and caring. I think most leaders actually care. I think it's the model that sits underneath them that either supports that or doesn't. Yeah. Great exercise for leaders to do is literally on a continuum, with on one side being transactional and on the other side, relational or relationship driven or human. Plot yourself on that continuum. Just put a mark where you think you sit, and then that's your truth. Then actually enable your staff to actually, because there's your truth and there's always another truth, enable your staff to actually do that for you as a leader. If you're sitting somewhere in the middle, then you're probably achieving a pretty good balance of, relationship, well-being, the human side of leadership, but then also the outcome, KPI-driven side that is obviously so linked into any level of success and performance. So it's a good challenge for leaders to look at.
No, I agree. And most of my leadership team, Scotty, I've been blessed with those guys too, and they've come along the journey really well. They shifted their thinking really quickly, but also my peers, and some of my peers in other states, and they're just a sensational group of people, and they really genuinely care for their staff as well. And so I'm pretty fortunate to have a lot of people that report to me that have come on the journey, people beside me and people above me that have really come on that journey, but sort of been that way inclined anyway. So it certainly hasn't been hard to convince them, if you like.
Agree. You mentioned community that, and look, I've been really privileged to work with a lot of your team, particularly in the Mount Gambier region, where the foundation's been running programs for mentors and teams. But ANZ and your team's support of that hasn't surprised me, but it's been a really nice thing to have that level of corporate engagement on a purpose-driven level. Why is the team so committed to that?
Yeah, I think that starts from the top too, Scotty. Like our purpose at ANZ is to shape a world where people and communities thrive. So by supporting communities out there like LifeChanger, which help so much in the community with driving the resilience and wellbeing of teams, that's a real tangible outcome for our team. Given we had a strong focus on wellbeing, I think LifeChanger resonated really strong with the group as well. But I think, genuinely that, like I said, it starts from the top as our purpose, and people like getting out there, and it is a bit of a feel good exercise, that when you give, it certainly gives you a lot of benefit as well, I think. And that, the whole gratitude piece is really a big part of wellbeing as well. So it's been a key thing for us, and again, it's been a consistent message for us. Like, I generally send a weekly note to my team, either via video or email, and it always starts with community and what people are doing in the community, and ultimately that builds your brand. But again, in terms of team days, community has always been a focus. Like, obviously yourself, and we had Anthony from Royal Flying Doctor Service, and Emma from United Way. So that was you guys were on a panel for our leadership day last year. So it's always been front of mind and a focus for us, and I think the teams just embrace it, and they love getting out there, and that makes them feel good. And I always think back to the guy that started Chobani. I don't know whether you've ever seen his TED talk, but it's just brilliant. He says, you look after the community, you look after the people, and you've got the right product. The profit looks after itself. So by getting out there in the community, it's a win-win, because you're supporting the community, but it does do wonders for your brand, and people start talking about your organisation in a much better light than what they would otherwise.
Mate, this is certainly not an advertisement for ANZ, but I know that community sits as one of the pillars or values of ANZ. It aligns really closely with one of our own, being Tribe, which is ultimately the same thing. So, it's nice to see a large corporate entity really deliver on their value, and I've seen it firsthand. So ANZ, for what it's worth, they've won my respect on the back of that. Every participant that comes on the Inside session, we get them to share, I guess, a more philosophical moment with us. So you need to complete this sentence: life is ...
Life is a journey of discovery, Scotty. I think you're always discovering new things about life and about yourself. I think some of the greatest discoveries are probably, for me, it was the birth of my kids. I think there's no other time in your life that you can sort of just, I don't know, you feel something that's indescribable, and I think you realise how precious life actually is. You kind of look down at the young one, and you just think, how is this possible? How has this happened? And then I think, when you go through that moment, you realise that's what life is, and that's how precious it is. And I think the other biggest discovery is when you discover yourself, ultimately, what makes you tick and what makes you happy, and what you want ultimately out of life. That's a pretty big discovery, but you're always going through. I think also the day you discover the ability to cope, because life throws you a lot of challenges, and you've just got to, you just got to find a mechanism to cope through, whatever that is.
Brendan, been great to have you on the show. I've really enjoyed watching your journey. We first came into contact sort of probably your early 20s, mid 20s, in a sporting connection. The way that you've actually taken your sporting experiences, sprinkled some well-being around that, your experiences around crisis management, and ultimately how you've been able to build community around your team. It's been a really inspiring journey to watch so far. So I'm interested to see where it takes you, and really look forward to continuing to work with you as we bring your team closer to the work we're doing in community, mate. So thanks for being on the Inside Sessions.
Thanks, Scotty, and I always value your relationship and connection, and all the work you've done with our team and what you're doing in the community. It's really inspiring. So it's been great to chat.
Stay well. See you, mate.
Thank you. See ya.
Please remember, if you're ever in need of support, reach out to Lifeline or Beyond Blue. For more Inside Sessions, you can find us on all of the social platforms or at lifechanger.org.au. Thanks for joining us, and here's to a life well lived.
I don't think I will ever know.